welcome back, chat, to the Chipped Cup Cafe. I'll be your barista and narrator for tonight. You can just call me Moka Kahvesi, but Moka's perfectly fine as well. So yeah, we're finally back after a rather weird week. First, last week was a bit stressful, lots of things happening in the background, errands to run. I was pretty much tired the entire week. And then when this week rolled around, we started it off with ISP problems, which was very fun. Everyone loves dealing with that. But yeah, they finally managed to fix the internet issues after about, what, 2-3 days of having no internet, which was absolutely god-awful. And mobile data here, or over here where I live, is not very reliable, to say the least. But yeah, we've just got some more Legends and Lattes lined up for today, so feel free to sit back, relax, and enjoy the light-hearted reading of this very, very lovely tale. Oh, and we've got a bot. Interesting. Let me just... Wonderful. Okay, let's get rid of that bot. But yeah, without further ado, let's move on back to Legends and Lattes. We will be picking up from chapter 14. This was around the time when our main character, Viv, a old retired orc adventurer, decided to hire a sort of new helper to her little cafe named, well, as the title says, Legends and Lattes. This new help that she hired was a small ratkin. Think like the rat people from Vermintide, named Thimble, because he was a really, really good cook, or baker rather. So he's been baking up a storm, basically, with some really, really good tasting cinnamon rolls, which kind of makes me crave for Cinnabon right about now. It's like 10 p.m. rather, so not sure where I'd be able to get that. But yeah, without further ado, let's begin. Thimble appeared before they opened the doors. Another list clutched in his paws. It wasn't particularly long. Currants, walnuts, oranges, cardamom, Viv asked, a puzzled expression. Thimble nodded ardently. I don't even know what the last one is, and the rolls are already perfect. The ratkin wrung his hands and looked aggrieved. Trust, he whispered. Viv held in a sigh. All right, I'll take care of it. Tandri, you're fine while I gather, whatever this is. If it means Thimble bakes more things, then I'll do almost anything you need, said Tandri. Thimble beamed. The morning was chill and damp as Viv headed back to the market district, doing her best to remember which shops Thimble visited during their first excursion. Oh, hang on. was. The currants, walnuts, and oranges didn't give her too much trouble, even if the oranges were a little rare this time of year. Viv asked about the last curious item at each stop, but the shopkeepers were as bewildered as she. She eventually retraced Thimble's steps to the elderly gentleman with the fragrant house. After a few wrong turns, Viv relocated the place and rapped on the door. After some shuffling and muttering, the old man cracked it an inch and glared at her dubiously. You might remember me," she said. "I was here with, She held a hand at Thimble's approximate height. "Little guy. Anyway, I'm looking for, cardamom?" "Running errands for Thimble, eh?" He opened the door a little wider. "Guess so. I have to say he's one hell of a baker." The old man glowered up at her through his spectacles. "That's a genius." Then he snatched the parchment from her hand and shuffled into the shadows of his house. Such a dense array of scents filtered out his door. It made Viv dizzy. Individually, they might have been pleasant, but taken all together, they were too much. She didn't know how the old man could abide it. After some distant muttering, some clatters and bumps, and a few sharp expletives, the old man returned with a brown paper packet. He thrust it at her along with the list. "2 silver, 4 bits," he said. "That much? Somebody else offering you a better price?" His grin was wide and not entirely pleasant. Viv dug through her coin purse and paid the man. The door then snapped shut in her face. Thimble received the groceries with a pleased squeak, carefully arranged them in the pantry, and returned to the rolls he had in progress. Business was at least as heavy as the day before, and Tandri flashed a grateful smile as Viv joined her behind the counter to help manage the rush. Viv couldn't help her disappointment that Thimble didn't seem to have an immediate use for the fruits of her shopping, but the morning press soon chased it from her mind. Only later, when the demand for rolls was more manageable, did Thimble retrieve the items from the back. Tandri gently elbowed Viv. "I am unbelievably excited to find out what he's going to do." "The old man I bought the cardamom from said Thimble's a genius," murmured Viv. "I don't think I needed some old man to tell me that," Tandri replied with a chuckle. "I'd say that's fair. Hang on." Oh, that's a creaky chair. Okay. There we go. The ratkin set to measuring and stirring and produced a thick, gluttonous dough, to which he added chopped walnuts and currants. He then grated the skin of the oranges over the bowl. The cardamom, it turns out, were small, wizened-looking seeds. He diced them incredibly fine, crushed them with the flat of his knife blade, delicately scraped some of the dust into the dough, and set the remainder aside in a twist of waxed paper. Tandri and Viv grudgingly took turns making drinks for customers, as Thimble kneaded and formed long, flat logs. He laid them out on 2 pans. Sprinkled them with fistfuls of sugar and popped them into the oven. Then he tidied things away, humming all the while, in his delicate, tuneful way. Well, the smell was promising, nutty and sweet and subtle. It put Viv in a mind of winter solstice celebrations. When he eventually withdrew the flat loaves from the oven, she and Tandri loomed close, but he shooed them away. Slicing them, he arranged rows on pans and returned them to the oven. "Twice?" asked Viv. He nodded vehemently. Or is it vehemently? I think it's vehemently. When he judged them done and set them out to cool, Viv studied them dubiously. They smelled nice, but resembled sad little slices of bread that hadn't risen. Thimble insisted they wait until the pastries cooled, and then, with nervous ceremony, he handed one to each of them. Sorry, I had to take a sip of tea there. Got my usual, funny enough, black currant. Now, where were we? Viv wrinkled her brow as she examined hers. It was hard, like incredibly stale bread. The old man had extolled Thimble's brilliance, and it was difficult to argue with the success of cinnamon rolls, but she shared a slightly worried look with Tandri. As they went to take bites, he waved anxious paws at them and urgently whispered, "With drink." Tandri dutifully brewed 2 lattes. They took experimental nibbles. And those hard little slices were good. They crumbled nicely, and the nuts and the fruit were elevated by an exotic, creamy sweetness that had to be the cardamom. Maybe not as good as the cinnamon rolls, but pleasing. The ratkin made an urgent dipping motion. Viv shrugged. She dunked one end into her latte and took another bite. Her eyes went wide. She chewed, swallowed, and allowed herself a moment to appreciate the subtle, elegant commingling of flavors. Oh, health, Thimble, that old man was right. You are a genius. The real genius, however, wasn't apparent until Tandri pointed it out. These will keep, won't they? Overnight, maybe for several days. He nodded and beamed at them both. We're going to need something to store these in. And Tandri, I think we're going to need to update the menu again. What do we even call these, though? I think I might have an idea, Tandri replied, with a smile tugging at her lips. She retrieved her chalk from under the counter and added this line underneath: Thimblets, crunchy nut and fruit delicacies for 2 bits apiece. The following morning, Thimblets didn't start as strong sellers. Whoops. I heard my Discord notice. Whoops. Sorry about that. The Thimblets didn't start as strong sellers, but in the occasional absence of rolls, diners took a chance on them. As the day progressed, they were sometimes even a first choice. Every so often, Viv found herself absently munching one and humming to herself. Oh, those sound really good. There we go. The kitchen seemed to grow more sweltering each day, and Viv and Tandri were both anxious for Cal's return. When he eventually appeared, the hob produced a big folded sheet of parchment, which he spread out on the countertop in front of them. It contained few separate sketches with some measurements, but Viv had no idea what she was looking at. So, this is our solution to the heat problem back here. It's an auto circulator, like I said. Saw one on a gnomish pleasure craft. Would take me a few hours to fix it in place, maybe even a whole day. Have to cut into the stovepipe a bit, and we'll need the ladder to hang it up there. Probably need a hand from you. Heavy. He pointed at the ceiling. I'm happy to close it for a day if it means we don't feel like we're in the oven back there. Tandri blew out a breath of agreement. Ain't cheap, though, said the hob, looking apologetic. He tapped the diagram. These I have to get from a gnomish artificer, and they come dear. How much are we talking? 3 sovereigns. That's only 2 months of telling the madrigal to take a swim. Cal's glare was severe. Only joking, said Viv mildly, although she wasn't sure she was. Would ya? Let's do it. She dug out 4 sovereigns and handed them over. Then for your time. No, don't hand one back. End of the week work for you? Perfect. When Cal returned at the appointed time, Viv already had a sign out front. Closed today only for renovation. She'd already seen several morning regulars reading it with various expressions of disappointment. An irrational fear that they'd never return again seized her, but she squashed it as best she could. The hob pushed a handcart loaded with a big, brass-barreled mechanism. Multiple large, wing-like blades, a smaller fan like a windmill, and a long leather band of some sort, resembling an enormous stropping belt. I think that's how you pronounce it. Viv stared at the confusion of parts with hands on hips. I had no idea how this was going to work from the drawings, and now I'm even more confused. Oh, it's clever, said Cal, grunting as he maneuvered the handcart through the doors Viv held open. Trust a gnome to surprise you. First, Cal removed this section of the stovepipe, cutting it in half and installing the small windmill-like fan into a clever housing with a set of interlocking gears on the spindle. Viv helped him position and reaffix it into the primary stovepipe. Viv retrieved the old ladder from the back alley and leaned it up against the wall. With some careful maneuvering, Cal ascended and she stepped up behind him, hauling the brass mechanism. Sorry, I'll have to open my water jug very quickly. Oh, that was loud. There we go. She managed to hold it in place against the ceiling with one hand, even her muscles straining at the awkward position and the weight held high above her head. Cal installed it quickly with some gnomish screws, and Viv tugged on it to make sure it wasn't going to come down on their heads. Viv ended up holding Cal above her so he could slot the big wing-like blades into 4 arms that radiated from the barrel, making it resemble a much larger version of the contraption in the stovepipe. Then they strung the enormous leather belt around the spindle brass barrel and across to the exposed wheel housing in the stovepipe. Well, said Viv, I still don't know how this works, but stone me if I don't want to see it in action. Cal chuckled dryly and tossed some wood into the stove before setting it alight. At first, nothing much happened, but as the heat built and the hot air rose, the belt began to move, very slowly at first. It never achieved a particularly high speed, but the big fan on the ceiling began to stir the air in a steady, cooling breeze. I'll be damned, said Viv. Said Cal. Maybe. Well, sorry, maybe. At least you won't burn alive till you get to the hells, though. Chapter 15. Gods, what a difference, said Tandri. Cal's auto-circulator twirled lazily above them, and the cool downdraft was indeed a blessed relief. Thimble appeared to appreciate it just as much, if not more. Viv wasn't even sure if the ratkin could sweat. He'd probably suffered more than any of them, especially working near the stove, although he'd never complained. Some morning regulars bemoaned the previous closure, but any grumbles were outweighed by their interest in the new gnomish gadget stirring the air. Glancing around, Viv decided that she was extremely proud of the shop's interior. It felt modern and forward-thinking, but also cozy and welcoming. The combined aromas of hot cinnamon, ground coffee, and sweet cardamom intoxicated her, and as she brewed and smiled and served and chatted, a deep contentment welled up. It was a glowing warmth she'd never experienced before, and she liked it. She liked it a great deal. A look around at the regulars confirmed they felt it too, and yet from behind the counter there was a sweetness she alone experienced. Because the shop is mine, she thought. She caught Tandri slipping into a smile beside her. Or maybe it's ours. Viv glanced up and saw Pendry, the hulking would-be bard, shifting from foot to foot just inside the threshold. This time he had a more traditional lute clutched in front of him. She thought he might accidentally twist the neck off with those big hands. He gripped it so tightly. Hi there, Pendry. She waited to see what he'd say, a touch amused. It was clear what he wanted to say. Well... Tandri shot her a mildly reproachful look, and Viv took pity on the poor kid. Want to give it another try? She asked, carefully keeping her eyes on her work. Sorry, I seem to have lost a page. Give me a second. There we go. I would like that, but I promise I'll play something less more traditional, miss. Miss? Ugh. Now I know why Lainey hated that. Viv made a face. I'm sorry? He ventured, wincing. She waved at him. Go ahead. Last time wasn't bad, exactly. Just surprising. Break a leg. Pendry looked stricken. Oh, poor guy doesn't understand it. I guess that's not a common saying around here. Tandri shrugged. Sounds pretty martial. You're probably right. Pendry blinked in confusion, then ducked his head and shuffled into the dining area again. This time, Viv resolved not to follow, in case it made his nerves worse than they already were. She did cock an ear and wait for a minute or so. Okay. Hearing nothing, she laughed under her breath and shook her head, starting a fresh pull of coffee. As she passed it to a customer and the hissing of the machine died, the sound of the lute became gradually apparent, much softer than last time. Pendry was playing a gentle ballad with a pleasant melody. It had a catchy strumming pattern, interspersed with delicate finger picking. It's nice, observed Tandri. He can play, can't he? Not bad, agreed Viv. A voice then joined the lute, high and sweet and soulful. Hang on, said Viv. Who is that? She ducked her head around the corner and gawked. Well, I'll be damned. It was Pendry, his singing voice unaccountably melodious and pure, a startling contrast to his bulk and blockiness. The price of what I meant to do was higher when the day was through. When I took a different road, I almost couldn't feel the load. I don't think I've ever heard that before, said Tandri. Maybe traditional sounding, but not traditional. I'd wager he wrote that. There were no expressions of shock amongst diners, and Viv even caught a foot or two tapping along. Sorry I ever doubted you, she murmured, partly to herself, but mostly to the scalbert stone tucked away beneath the floor. Sorry, what was that? Oh, nothing. Just another stroke of good luck. Later, Hemington approached the counter and rather awkwardly ordered one of everything. You want a coffee and a latte? Asked Viv, eyeing him with suspicion. Yes. He paused and fidgeted for a moment. And then I had something I wanted to ask you. Viv sighed. Hemington, if you're looking for a favor, just ask. I don't want to brew coffee you're not going to drink. Oh, well, excellent, he said brightly. You're buying one of these, though, she said, sliding a thimblet over to him. Of course. He paid for it, but doesn't seem to know what to do with it. Well, what can I do for you, Hem? To start, I'd appreciate if you didn't call me Hem. I believe you're the one asking for a favor. In a shop where you don't actually want anything we sell. Hem. He grimaced. It's not that I don't want any. Oh, never mind. He took a big breath and tried to start over. I was hoping you'd allow me to lay a ward here as part of my research. Viv frowned. A ward? What for? Well, it's really my primary area of study, and with the non-fluctuating confluence of ley lines here, and the amplifying effect they have on atomic constructions that align with a material substrate, it may be a more straightforward answer, Hemington. It will be entirely unnoticeable. He absently bit the thimblet. But what will it do? Well, it could do any number of things. That, in and of itself, isn't important, and it will not disrupt your customers or anyone else. You shouldn't even see it. Then why haven't you done it already? He looked affronted. I would never, he said with great dignity, spoiled somewhat by the bite of the thimblet that followed. What sort of ward? Asked Tandri, who had clearly been listening in. Optical trigger, anima proximity, using a precision focus. Anima proximity, and the focus could be anything. A pigeon? Why would you want to track whether a pigeon flew over the building? Asked Tandri. Well, it's just an example, said Hemington. As I said, what it does isn't important. I just like to study the stability, range, and accuracy of the ward's response. Viv sighed in resignation. If I don't have to hear any more about it, then go right ahead. Unless, she looked at Tandri, unless I should care. She was nervous that this would somehow expose the secret under the floor, but objecting more strenuously might accomplish the same thing. If he had some means of investigating specifically for the stone, she wouldn't know anyway, so perhaps it was best just to go with it for now. "It'll be fine," said Tandri. "I told you it would be unnoticeable," laughed Hemington. "Unnoticeable isn't the same as harmless," said Viv mildly. "But yeah, go ahead." Thank you." "How's the thimble?" she asked with a sly smile. "The what?" She pointed at his now empty hands. He'd eaten the whole thing. Things had been going far too smoothly for far too long, and if Viv had been out in the wilderness or on a campaign or camped outside a beast's lair, a premonition of impending misfortune would have prickled along her spine. While she and Tandri shut down for the evening, Lack appeared outside the shop with Tandri's unwelcome admirer Kellen, and at least 6 or 8 others. As Viv stood blocking the doorway, she reflected that she really should not have let her vigilance lapse. "What is it?" asked Tandri, dropping the mug she'd been cleaning into the wash water, and moving to look around Viv's side. She froze at the sight of Kellen, her eyes darting to the men and women behind him. They bristled with enough knives to warrant concern. Viv found herself wishing that Amity would show up, but the dire cat was frustratingly absent. Viv wasn't particularly worried about the knives for herself, but Tandri's presence threw off her mental calculus of risk entirely. The succubus had witnessed her last encounter with Lack, but there was no gate warden present this time to uphold the illusion of law. Alone, Viv never feared for her own skin. With Tandri beside her, brute strength felt like no defense at all. "Well, congratulations on your ongoing success," said Lack, doffing his hat and executing a half-bow. Viv couldn't decide if it was intended to be mocking or not. "End of the month already, is it?" she asked grimly. Could have sworn there were a few more days. Lack nodded agreeably. "Indeed. It's not readily apparent, but the trickiest part of my job is ensuring that things go smoothly, that there are no problems. You see, if there is blood or bones get broken or property meets misfortune, that's a failure. It's not just a foundation for a good business. The Madrigal wants good business, repeatable business, and diligence on my part is key to making that happen." "Hi, Tandri," said Kellen with a possessive smile in her direction. Lack frowned at him. Tandri glanced at Viv, eyes wide. Viv tried her best to project confidence. Lack continued. "I'm here to impress on you that I'm serious, that we do expect collection at the end of the month, and to reiterate that, while I would prefer to count this as a success, a failure of civility will be more to your disadvantage than ours." Viv clenched her fists at her sides. "Might be more of a disadvantage for you than you expect." Lack sighed in an aggrieved way. "Look, there's no denying you're very physically capable. That's clear. But you have a business. You have employees. You're doing well. Would you really want to throw that away on some sort of misguided principle? The world is full of taxes and allowances and concessions that keep moving things forward. This is just another one of those. Hate to see this place burn to the ground, said Kellen, with an extremely punchable grin on his face. Black's motion was liquid and savage as he snagged Kellen's lapel and yanked him close to his face. Shut up, you insufferable shit weasel, he snarled. From the speed of that motion, Viv instantly knew that she'd misjudged Black's quality as a threat. Kellen stumbled away, mouth gaping, chastened. Another week, he said. I look forward to a trouble-free relationship in the future. He nodded to Viv and then to Tandri. Apologies, miss. And then they left. Viv was straightening up from her pack with the blinkstone in hand when Tandri found her in the loft. Are you alright? Asked Tandri. Viv was touched, swiftly followed by a guilty realization of who had been most threatened by the men in the street. How could she have failed to ask how Tandri felt? It was too late now, though. Fine. She winced at the shortness of her answer, just thinking about my options. She stared at the blinkstone in her palm. The succubus glanced curiously at it, but Viv didn't offer to explain. Tandri swept her gaze over the barren room, empty except for Viv's bedroll, her pack, and some leftover construction materials stacked neatly in the corner. This is where you sleep? I'm used to less, said Viv, suddenly embarrassed. Tandri was quiet for a long moment. You know, you've built something pretty wonderful. Something special. She held Viv's gaze. And I know you're making your life. I can relate. I know what that feels like, and what it means to want that. She gestured around the empty room. That down there is not your whole life. What you do with the rest of the time is at least as important. For someone who reads a lot, you don't even have any books. Maybe Viv had neglected a few pleasures. That was hard to argue with, but she tried anyway. I don't really need anything else, though. I could feel it today. It was enough, and I don't mean to lose it. Is it enough, though? Tandri frowned and looked down. What they want to take from you, the reason it's so untenable, it's because they'd be taking everything you have. I'm just saying that maybe if you treated the rest of your life the same way you do the shop, invested in it the same way, then the cost would seem less. Viv didn't know what to say to that. Whatever happens, said Tandri, I think maybe you should pay a little attention to this room. Her smile was wan. At least get a damn bed. Subtle, I like it. Viv waited until she heard Tandri close the shop door behind her. When she entered the kitchen, a short while later, the only sound was the thrum of a stove. She opened the firebox door and stood for a long time, staring into the flames. Viv glanced at black blood, freshly garlanded. Then she tossed the blinkstone in, closed the stove, and climbed the ladder to try and fail to find sleep in her cold bedroll. Chapter 16. It was 3 days before the old crew, minus Finnis, arrived at the shop. In the late afternoon, Rune was the first to duck inside the door. He raised his eyebrows at Viv behind the coffee maker and gave the busy interior a considering glance. Galena stepped out from behind him, where she'd been hidden by his bulk, goggles up in her spiky hair, a wide grin splitting her face. Typhus slipped gracefully in after and inclined his head. "Evening, Viv," said Rune. "Closing a little early, folks," hollered Viv. Boisterous complaints answered back. Tandri gave her a startled glance, saw her expression, and then noted Rune and the other new arrivals. "All friends of yours?" "Old friends," said Viv, cocking a thumb at the sword behind her. "Is that black blood?" exclaimed Galena with a high laugh. Oh, that was loud, sorry. "She looks like a solstice wreath." "That's her," said Viv with a smile. "Give me a few minutes to empty the place." It took longer than she'd have liked to encourage the last of the diners out the door, and Viv wished, not for the first time, that she had some way to let the customers take their drinks with them. Ah well, a problem for another time. She sent Thimble on his way, but when she opened her mouth to speak to Tandri, the succubus held up a hand, her tail lashing sharply behind her. "I'm staying." Viv thought about that for a moment, then nodded and said, "All right." They sat on the benches at the big communal table. Tandri brewed coffees and Viv set out a plate of cinnamon rolls and thimblets. "Thanks for coming," said Viv, when they were all seated and served. She toyed with a mug in front of her. "And I guess first things first, this is Tandri. She's my co-worker. Tandri, you know Rune. This is Galena and Typhus." She gestured to each in turn. "Twice charmed," said Rune around an enormous bite of cinnamon roll. "A succubus, huh?" said Galena, her chin propped on her hand. Viv saw Tandri stiffen. "The little gnome must have as well." I don't mean anything by it, sweetie. Long as you don't ask me to invent anything. Pleased to meet you. Love the look." The gnome waved tiny fingers at Tandri's sweater. "Galena tends more to, wet work," said Viv. "I do like knives." Galena produced one from nowhere to trim her nails. Typhus nodded solemnly at Tandri and nibbled at the edge of a thimblet. The stone fairy was as taciturn as ever, his watchful face framed in white hair. "Nice to meet you all," said Tandri. She took a quick sip of her drink, and Viv could swear she was nervous. Rune set his matching blinkstone on the table between them as he polished off his roll and reached for a thimblet. "So, seeing the place and tasting these, I'm inclined to think you didn't send for us because you're hoping to sleep rough and crush skulls again. You're hoping to sleep rough and crush skulls again." "You got me there," said Viv. "No, I'm not coming back." She stared at Galena thoughtfully. "Before I get into that, though, I owe you an apology. All of you. I'm not proud of the way I left. You deserve better from me. After all those years, I was just afraid that... We know, said Galena. Rune told us. She squinted at Viv. I was a little pissed, I don't mind saying, but this is nice. She gestured expansively at the shop. Happy for you, Viv. I didn't mind, said Typhus in a quiet voice, because if anyone has understood avoiding a difficult conversation, or indeed any conversation, it was the Stone Fae. Well, now that's out of the way. Let's get down to it, said Rune, with a big grin. We're focal action, eh? Unless you just wanted to feed us, and if that was the case, can't say as I'd complain. He started in on his second roll. Viv took a big breath and sighed it out. So, things are going well. Really well. Better than I could have hoped. But there's a local element that I need to deal with. Tyvus looked suddenly interested, and Galena stood up on the bench and planted both hands on a table to get a better eye line. And you haven't sent them off with broken bones and better manners yet? Well, no, not so far. Then you want us to help with that? Galena's grin was eager and a little bloodthirsty. It's not as simple as that. Oh, this is the simplest, said Galena. Nothing simpler. Viv flattened her hands in front of her and tried to think of the right words to use. Here's the thing. I was hoping that the threat of me would be enough. I even hung black blood on the walls as, I don't know, a sort of warning. I don't want to deal with this the way the old Viv would have, because she struggled to articulate it. Because if she does, it ruins everything, said Tandri, joining the conversation. Rune looked dubious. She's taken care of problems just like this a dozen times. 24. Protecting what's yours? There's no shame in that. Don't see how that would ruin anything, except the face of whatever fool is trying to shake her down. That's not what I mean, said Tandri with surprising heat. Sorry I'm late. Hey, welcome back. No worries. We're just in chapter 16 right now. I believe you're just off shift, so that's perfectly fine. Feel free to just relax here. I'll be, for lack of a better word, just keeping up a cozy vibe, yeah? No worries. Ah, your order arrived. What did you get? Sorry, I forget if this was a food order or if this was like I got delivered it wrong. There. Oh, that's very audible now. Just imagine I was patting your head there. But yeah. So, for those who don't know chat, he is both my mod and my partner. Anyway, you're gonna lurk because you gotta call them. No worries, no worries. Thanks for coming nonetheless. Fun will do. Thank you, thank you. Now, where were we? That's not what I mean, said Tandri with surprising heat. Sure, it might be fine this time for this one thing. But once it's an option, once she can pick that back up, she pointed at the sword on the wall, she loses what she won just by building this place without it. Maybe next time it's just a job to earn a little silver in a lean winter. Maybe a bounty in exchange for a shipping discount. And little by little, this isn't that coffee shop in Thune where you can get a cinnamon roll as big as your head. It's Viv's territory, and you don't want to cross her. And did you hear about the time she broke the legs of somebody who looked at her funny? She has done that, whispered Galina out of the side of her mouth. That was before. Tandri stabbed the table with a finger. Right now, in this town, the shop is a clean slate. She could pay the madrigal and let it be. Well, Viv, said the room, who looked confused. Well, that's what you're thinking. Why are we here? Viv tossed up her hands helplessly. I don't know. Advice. Or I guess I thought. You thought we might do it? Finished Galina. She archly inquired. Were you gonna offer to pay us? Viv looked pained. No, that's not what I had planned. I don't know what I should do. She made a frustrated growl deep in her throat. The problem is I don't want to pay them. I don't think I can bring myself to do it. And no, I'm not trying to hire you to take care of the problem, but I thought maybe just a show of force. That's the sword on the wall again, said Tandri. And if you go too much further, you might as well use it and be done with it. They all fell silent for a moment. The madrigal, said Tyvus. You know him? Asked Viv. I know of them, he replied. Then what do you think? Tyvus was characteristically thoughtful and quiet, but they all waited without saying a word. It may be, he eventually said, that this can be resolved without blood. I'm all ears, said Viv. It's possible I may be able to arrange a parley, he continued. Meeting in a dark alley to talk terms seems like a sure way to get a knife in the back, observed Galina. The madrigal and Viv have more in common than you might think, said Tyvus. Why do you say that? I've met them before, he said. I'm bound by certain oaths not to reveal overmuch, and I take those oaths seriously, but I have a sense that it would be worth the effort. And you could set this up? Asked Viv. I believe I could. I'll reach out to a contact in the city. We should know by nightfall tomorrow. Galina looked unconvinced. I still think murdering them in their beds would be safer. I assure you it would not, said Typus dryly. And you really think the risk of this is better than just paying what they're asking? Tandri crossed her arms, her expression severe. Viv thought about that for a moment. I don't think it's better, she sighed. But I feel like I've cut all the tethers to the old Viv but one, and I can't bring myself to cut that last rope. I'm just not ready yet. Tandri's mouth tightened, but she said nothing further. There was a long and uncomfortable silence. It was broken suddenly when Rune shot up from the bench. What in the hells is that? He exclaimed. The dire cat had appeared and circled behind them. She rubbed along the bench, purring like an earthquake. That's Amity, said Viv with a relieved grin. She glanced over at Tandri, grateful that the tension was broken, or at least deferred. Why'd you need us when you've got a damned hell beast on staff? Rune cried. You're just a sweetie, aren't you? Cooed Galina, scratching Amity's back vigorously with both hands. She could have easily ridden the dire cat. She's a fair weather watch cat, Viv chuckled. Shows up when she feels like it. She's hungry too, observed Galina, offering the enormous creature a roll. Amity swallowed it whole. After that, the conversation moved on to other, less delicate matters, and Viv brought out more drinks, while Rune polished off the remaining baked goods. Dusk was long past when they finally filtered out the door, leaving Viv and Tandri behind to close up shop. And quietly, excuse me there, cleaned together, scrubbing and wiping and sweeping. As Viv dried her hands and turned to the front of the shop, Tandri was standing in the entry with an unreadable expression on her face. "I'm sorry," the woman suddenly said. "For what?" "It wasn't my place to say those things, to speak for you, so I apologize." Viv frowned and looked down at her hands for a moment. "No, you were right. You were right about how it should be, how I think I want it to be. I don't know if I can do that yet, but..." She looked back at Tandri. "I hope that someday I can. So, thank you." "Oh," Tandri made a small nod. "That's all right then. Good night, Viv." She quietly left the shop. "Good night, Tandri," Viv said to the closed door. Chapter 17. Viv and Tandri worked quietly and companionably with no mention of the prior evening. Viv worried it might become tense between the two of them, but it hadn't. The morning was calm and easy, and she allowed herself not to think about the madrigal, or the end of the month, or how it will all feel to take black blood in hand and cut any brewing problems off at the knee. It was nice. Baldree showed up again around midday, loot at the ready, and with less cringing dread about him, Viv thought. She jerked her head toward the dining area with a smile, and he shuffled around the corner. A slightly more energetic but still folksy ballad arose shortly after. Oops. Lips twined with Baldree's sweet and earnest voice. Even nicer. Hang on, give me a second. Okay. Later, Tandri nudged her and murmured, "He's back. Who is? The mysterious chess player." The elderly gnome was indeed unfolding a wooden board onto the table out front. After carefully setting out the pieces, clearly reproducing a game in progress, he strolled into the shop. He peered over the countertop and a voice like rumpled velvet said, "One latte, please, my dears, and one of those delightful confections." He pointed at the glass jar of thimblets. "You bet," said Viv. As Tandri was brewing his drink, her tail did a few quick back-and-forth slashes, which Viv was coming to recognize as one of her anxious gestures. Eventually, the woman couldn't stand it anymore and asked with exaggerated casualness, "So, waiting for someone?" She indicated the chessboard through the window. The little old man looked surprised. "Not at all," he replied, and took his drink and pastry, bobbed a nod, and returned to his table. Within moments, Amity had appeared as if by magic and curled up under his table again. Tandri scrunched her mouth into a frown. "Damn it," she said under her breath. Viv chuckled to herself, and with no customers waiting, brewed another coffee and strolled into the other room to watch Baldree play. He'd taken one of the outdoor chairs and moved it inside to sit on, which seemed a bold move for him. Viv approved. Eyes closed, he lost himself in playing, fingers flying, crooning another song that Viv didn't think she'd ever heard before. When the tune concluded and he took a brief break, she walked over and handed him the drink. "You're good." She glanced around. "No hat or box for coins?" I hadn't thought of it. You should. Okay, he stammered. So, that music you were playing the first day, it was unusual. He winced and looked like he was going to apologize. Not bad, she said quickly, just different. Maybe you should give it another try, now that you've warmed them up a little. She gestured with her head at the diners behind her. It's something I was experimenting with, but maybe it's a bit much. He still looked a little green around the gills. You weren't always a musician, huh? She pointed at his blunt and withered fingers, so much different from the calloused fingertips of a lifetime lute player. No, no. The family business is a little different. Well, keep at it. And maybe bring back the other lute when you feel like it, she nodded, and left him goggling after her. Hello again, Cal. Good to see you, said Tawdry. Viv turned to find the hob on the other side of the counter, where he eyed the interior critically, as though fearing it might collapse at any moment. Place seems to be holding up all right, he declared. She almost expected him to test the wall by kicking it. Your usual? He nodded. Tawdry smiled with genuine warmth as she started the grinder. It grumbled for a moment. There was a sputter and a long whir, and she cut the switch. Ah, hells, the bean hopper is empty. I'll get it back, offered Viv. No, I'll take care of it. Tawdry briefly touched Viv's arm and headed for the pantry. I see, so this is where the romance starts. When Viv looked back at Cal, he flicked his gaze up from her arm to meet her eyes. She found this thoughtful of puzzling. He cleared his throat. Everything seems to be going along just fine, it appears, he said with more delicacy than usual. Viv squinted at him. Fine enough, although I don't mind saying I wish I saw more of you. Drinks around the house any time you drop on by. Cal snorted but couldn't hide a smile. Playing on my contrariness, so I paid double. Triple if I can get it, you stubborn old goat. She managed to get a laugh out of him at that, but then caught him looking over her shoulder toward the pantry. Going along just fine, he repeated. Make sure to stop and see him. Lou started to ask what he meant when Tawdry reappeared. Sorry about that. Won't be a minute, she said as she flipped the hatch and poured beans with a rattling hiss. Then Cal got his cup. Viv grudgingly accepted his copper, but then slid a roll in front of him with a triumphant smile. He grumbled good-naturedly, but took both. Galena appeared in the late afternoon, alone. Was hoping to catch up some before we head out tomorrow, she said, standing on tiptoe to fold her arms on the counter. Just us two. Sure, that would be good, honestly. Let me just close things up early here first. That's all right, said Tawdry. No need to close. You go ahead. You sure? Absolutely. I'll handle everything later. It's not that busy. Tawdry shoot her off. Thanks, said Viv. As Viv and Galena strolled away from the shop, Viv asked, Anything you had in mind? Galena looked up at her and cocked an eyebrow. I'm hungry. You're a loco. What's good? Can't say I've really taken in the sights, although maybe I do know a place. Viv led her to the Fay Cafe she and Tawdry had visited. Ooh, this is fancy, said Galena with a twinkle in her eye. Oh, I'm pretty cosmopolitan now, Viv snorted, remembering what Tawdry had said. They ordered and ate and talked about old times. Viv began to feel like they'd sailed back into the easy waters of friendship again. As they picked at the crumbs of their meal, Galena's expression grew speculative. You know what I think of all this? She said, circling her hand, her tone sharp. You think I should knife them in their beds, said Viv, smiling a little. I do, replied Galena seriously. Before they decide they want to take more from you than they planned. I don't care what typist says, meet this mother go. You're gonna go and stake yourself out like a goat in front of a cave. Worst comes to worst, I can take care of myself. I know you can. I just want to make sure you do. She produced 4 slim knives like magic and slid them across the table toward Viv. I want you to take these with you. Fine, leave black blood wrapped up in flowers or whatever, but don't be dumb. Viv was simultaneously touched and a little exasperated. She put one big hand over the weapons and pushed them back toward Galena. If I give myself that breathing room, I might just take advantage of it. I don't want to have the excuse. I hate hell's Viv. Galena crossed her arms and pouted. Then she whisked the knives away. Not going to stab me with one of those? Maybe later, she sighed hugely. Whatever, I guess. Now you owe me something sweet for bruising my feelings so bad. I'll see if they got a dessert menu. Galena walked Viv back to the shop. So, what's a girl gotta do to get a sack of those sweet rolls? She asked. Didn't I just buy you dessert? Think about gnomes. We've got the metabolism of hummingbirds, said Galena with a huge grin. I'll see what I can do. Tawdry was in the middle of shutting things down and waved at them both. Viv wrapped the last 3 rolls in wax paper, tied them with some string, and grandly handed the packet to Galena. Should last me the walk to my room, she said with a nod and a wink. Then she sobered. Look, I don't know if I should say it, because I don't want to set you jumping at shadows, but Fennis... What about him? I think you should just keep an eye out. Did he say something? Well, not exactly, but I don't know if he had some arrangement with him or something. But he's been strange lately, so maybe it's nothing, but I gotta listen to my little voice, I guess. I'll be careful, said Viv, remembering Fennis's visit and his parting remarks. He does indeed have the ring of fortune about it. Viv helped Tawdry finish closing up. As she washed and dried the last mug, Tawdry leaned on the counter. Good visit? It was, said Viv. I've known Galena for years. Not my finest moment, leaving the way I did, but I think that's smoothed over now. That's good. Tawdry's tail did its side-to-side slash. But, prompted Viv, knowing there was more, you should be careful when you take the meeting. Viv chuckled. You don't live as long as I have doing what I did without taking precautions. I think that's what worries me. Precautions. Viv stared at her levelly. Galena offered me knives. I made her keep them. That's good. I mean, it's not my place to... Ah, shit. Tawdry hung her head and her glossy hair fell forward. She looked up again. You know, part of what I am, who I am, I have a sense about things. A sense. As a succubus, we pick up more of intentions, emotions, and also secrets. Viv had a sinking feeling she knew where this was going. Look, I know that there's more to all this than what you'll say, and that's okay. Again, it's not my place, but it makes me think this is more dangerous than just some crime boss wringing out protection money. Viv thought about the Scalvert stone, but she hadn't gotten any sense from Black or his goons that they knew about it. And why would they? The stone's lore was obscure. It was hardly sitting out for all to see. She'd been careful. I do have something I'm playing close to the vest, admitted Viv. But I can't figure out any way the Madrigal could know about it. And even if he did, the odds he'd care are low, I think. Like I said Tawdry, I can sense things from you and from all of them yesterday, something unsaid, and I have a bad feeling. Viv thought about Galina's warning about Fennis and wondered exactly what he had said to the rest of the crew. I'll be careful, said Viv. It's all I know to do at this point. I hope that's enough. The shop was fully squared away, and after glancing around, Tawdry nodded to herself, and after a long silence, said, "Well, good night." As she turned to go, Viv blurted, "Hey, so you want a walk home? What, with that Kellen guy in your sense of things? Maybe it'd feel safer." Tawdry thought about it for a moment. That'd be nice. The night was dark and cool, and the smell of the river had a fresher, earthy flavor that was pleasant. The street lanterns cast yellow pools in the blue of the evening shadows. They strolled in a relaxed silence, with Tawdry leading the way, until they came to a building on the north side that was clearly a grocer's on the bottom story. "Up there," said Tawdry, gesturing at the side stairway. "I'm sure I'll be fine the last few steps." "Of course," said Viv, suddenly awkward. "See you tomorrow, then?" "Tomorrow." After watching her ascend and slip into the building, Viv walked around Thune for several hours, before returning to the darkened shop where the last embers in the stove had gone cold. Chapter 18. Viv handed Lainey one of her own plates with a fresh and steaming roll on it, something she'd been doing for a few days now. Lainey always left a clean plate on Viv's counter before closing, with 4 shiny bits on it. Every morning, Viv returned it, less the coins, plus a pastry. "Well, thank you, dear," cried Lainey, taking the plate with eager hands. "You tell that Ratkin lad if he wants to trade the recipe sometimes. I've got some corkers." "I'll be sure to let him know," Viv replied, wondering what Thimble would make of Lainey's cakes. "Just so proud to have you as a neighbor." Viv glanced back at the shop. "I hope so, because it looks like you might be stuck with me." Lainey nodded. "Good to see you settling in." All that was needed was a partner. "A partner?" The old woman's eyes grew distant. "My old Titus used to say we filled each other's gaps. Of course, when he said it, it sounded dirtier." While Viv puzzled over that, Lainey wafted the steam from the roll to her nose. "I don't mind telling you, this beats the smell of horse apples any day of the week." Her eyes disappeared in a dried fruit crinkle over a grin. "I'd always hoped we'd clear the high bar set by horse shit." That's one way to call them, horse apples. Lainey burst into cackling laughter, and Viv returned to the shop, shaking her head. Tyvus was waiting beside the door, grey as morning smoke and just as quiet. He wordlessly handed her a folded scrap of parchment. Viv thanked him, and he nodded, then ghosted down the street. She unfolded it and read it. Friday at dusk. Corner of Branch and Settle. Come alone, unarmed. Her meeting with the madrigal was set. I don't like that you're going alone, said Tandri. It's not really up for negotiation. Viv set the crossbar across the big doors and moved to douse the wall lanterns. I could watch from a distance. Even if they didn't notice you, which they would, it wouldn't do any good. The madrigal isn't at this address. Likely they'll cover my eyes and we'll walk from there. If you'd followed, they'd definitely notice. Viv shrugged. Sorry, aren't you worried? Viv shrugged. Not much point. That's exasperating. I learned to stay loose and level a long time ago. Things always turn out better that way, usually for everybody. The shop was fully shut, and they stood outside as Viv locked the door. The sun was coming down slow, but sure, and the light burned red. Go home, said Viv gently. I'll tell you everything tomorrow. If you're not here in the morning, then what should I do? Asked Tandri grimly. I'll be here, but if I'm wrong. Viv handed her the spare key to the front door, and after a second's thought, she unstrung the one around her neck. And this one's for the strong box. Tandri turned them over in her hands. This isn't exactly reassuring. Viv grasped her shoulder and could feel the tension there. I'll be fine. I've been in worse scrapes and have the scars to prove it. I don't expect any new ones tomorrow. Promise me that? Can't promise, but if I'm wrong, I guess you can clear out the cash box. Tandri gave her a thin smile. I expect the door to be unlocked tomorrow when I get here. Viv didn't have to wait long on the corner of Branch and Settle, far south of the shop. She could see why they'd chosen it. The intersecting streets were intermittently lit. The corner itself was overlooked by a big splintered heap of a warehouse. A familiar face emerged from a darker scrap of shadow and doffed his hat. Well, we're on our way to becoming fast friends, it seems. Won't be long until you find yourself using my name. I guess you can put in a friendly word for me then, said Viv. She looked around but didn't see anyone else. She knew they were there, though. How's this going to work? Follow me, said Lack. He gestured at a small doorway into the warehouse. She did, and once they stepped inside, he produced a hood. A blindfold won't do. Lack shrugged. You'll breathe just fine. She sighed and tugged it on. Only a little of the warehouse's dim light filtered through the weave. Lack's hand found her elbow, and she didn't flinch at his touch. He steered her through the building, and then she heard a metallic shriek. Viv felt the boards under her feet jump as he flipped open a pair of doors in the floor with two dusty bangs. He led her down a set of creaking stairs, touching the top of her head to warn her of the frame so she didn't crack her skull as she descended. She smelled earth at first, and the growing scent of the river. They passed through pockets of coolness and cross breezes, and they turned several times. Sometimes the floor was stone and gravel, and other times dirt or wood. Eventually they ascended another set of stairs, rising into the smell of wood oil and cleaner and fabrics and something more floral that Viv couldn't quite place. "All right," said Lack. Viv removed the hood from her head and took in what was before her. Well, I guess I wasn't expecting that. The room was cozy. A pair of huge stuffed armchairs sat before a small, tidily bricked fireplace with an ornate folding screen. The low twinkle of flames showing behind. Polished tables flanked the chairs, one holding a tea service heavily illustrated with twining plants. A large, gilt-framed mirror hung above the fireplace, and red velvet drapes bordered big, paneled windows. Enormous bookshelves towered against the walls, positively crammed with thick volumes. Cresseted doilies covered a long, low table, and luxurious carpet was soft underfoot. A tall, elderly woman sat ensconced in one of the armchairs, her silver hair in a severe bun, her face regal but not unkind. She was crocheting a fresh doily and took her time completing her round before absently looking at Viv. To Viv, it was blindingly clear from her bearing and from the deference lacked showed that this was, indeed, the madrigal. "Why don't you take a seat, Viv?" said the woman. Her voice was dry and strong. Viv did take a seat. Before she could speak, the madrigal continued. "Of course, I know a great deal about you. That's at least half of my business, knowing and connecting. But I confess I was surprised when Tyvus reached out. Of course, he went by a different name when I knew him." She glanced up from her crocheting. Crocheting? Did he mention how he knew me? Her expression was mild, but Viv sensed a great blackness beneath that question. "No, ma'am." The madrigal nodded. And Viv couldn't help but wonder what might have happened if she'd answered differently. Tyvus's appeal might not have been enough for me to agree to meet you, she said, if it hadn't been for another mutual acquaintance. Another? Viv was confused. Indeed, the movement of her crochet hook was hypnotic. It only took another moment for Viv to catch on, and it should have taken less. Fenris. He did provide me with some interesting information, and as I said, knowing is my business. So he had a tale to tell, something about a scrap of an old song, maybe, and a new visitor to the city. All of which is why you're here, not because of some monthly dues. She fluttered a hand as though they were of no consequence. Someone's mouth pinched. Also, I'll be frank. Despite what you might think, given the circumstances, I don't have much use for assholes. Viv couldn't stop herself from snorting. You agreed to meet me out of spite? She thought she caught a twinkle in the madrigal's eyes. Let me be straightforward. At my advanced age, I found that the fast cut bleeds less. That wasn't exactly Viv's experience, but she understood the sentiment. If this woman wanted directness, she'd oblige. What do you want to know? You have a scalded stone? I do. Somewhere on the premises, I imagine. Yes. The woman nodded appreciatively. I've read a few of the verses and myths, and supplied some, as you've guessed, but my own resources are extensive. You could take it from me. Viv had a twist of nausea, but also a wild feeling of boldness, almost like the old days. I could, agreed the madrigal. She looked sharply at Viv. Would it do me any good? Viv thought about that for a moment. Hard to say. Based on what I know, location matters, and I'm not entirely sure it works. My dear, there was a derelict library at that address, run by an impotent moron with a drinking problem. And in a few months, you, a woman who deals mostly in blood, have rebuilt it into a successful business that is gathering attention across Thun. Let's not be coy. I guess I've seen enough coincidences that I find it easy to doubt, but you're probably right. I'm rarely wrong. It's been known to happen, but I don't like to let on. So, are you planning to take it from me? The madrigal put her crocheting in her lap and stared hard at Viv. No. Can I ask why not? Because the information available is open to interpretation. I'm not convinced I'd benefit. Viv frowned thoughtfully. The madrigal continued. Now, about those monthly dues. Viv took a deep breath. Begging your pardon, ma'am, but I'd rather not pay. The madrigal resumed her crocheting. You know, you and I aren't so different. The side of her mouth quirked up. Well, you're certainly taller, she said dryly. But we've both journeyed between extremes of expectation. I've simply traveled in the opposite direction. I feel a certain kinship with that sort of ambition. Viv remained respectfully silent until the madrigal continued. There are precedents to maintain, however. Now I have a proposal for you. I'm listening. After the madrigal made her offer, Viv smiled, agreed, and reached out to shake her hand. Chapter 19. Scalbert's stone? Asked Tandri, returning Viv's keys. They sat across from one another at the big table the following morning. Long before Thimble was due. Tandri had unlocked the door and slipped inside in the wee hours. Not that Viv had been asleep. As promised, she was recounting the meeting, and she omitted nothing. Ever heard of them? I haven't. I suppose I know what a scalvert is, mostly from children's stories. They're large and ugly and mean. Lots of eyes, more teeth than you'd like, hard to kill, and the queen of a hive grows a stone. Here. Viv tapped her forehead. And it's worth something? Not to most people, but I came across some legends, heard it in the song first, if you can believe it. Viv fished the scrap of parchment from her pocket and slid it across to Tandri, who unfolded it and read. Her eyebrows rose. The ley lines. No wonder you twitched every time Hemington noticed them. You noticed that, Draws the ring of fortune, aspect of heart's desire. Tandri looked up at her. So it's, what, a good luck charm? A handful of long-dead people thought so. I'm not sure that's exactly what they meant, but the idea comes up again and again. There's a lot of old mythology around the stones, but you don't hear about them much these days. Probably because there aren't a lot of scalvert queens around, and even fewer people willing to kill one. Well, you certainly piqued my interest. What does one hide a maybe magical luck stone? Viv rose from the bench, motioned for Tandri to do likewise, and slid the big table aside a few feet. She squatted, dug sand from around the flagstone, and pried it up and out with the ends of her fingers. She carefully scooped aside the earth, revealing the stone, which glistened as though wet. Been here since the first day, said Viv. Tandri squatted to examine the stone. I have to say, my mental image was a little more spectacular. And you think it's responsible for all this? Viv thought it might be responsible for a lot more than the building, but didn't elaborate. I've had my doubts, but the madrigal sure seems to think so. But she let you leave. Why hasn't she already taken it? Tandre's expression was dubious. In fact, why aren't her men here right now, tearing this place apart? Viv carefully set the flagstone back in place and brushed sand in and around it. I'll get to that. She slid the table back into place, and they both sat again. You remember Fenus? Difficult to forget. And she glanced at the scrap of verse on the table, brow furrowing as she thought back. It's obvious now that he knew you had it. Yep, and it sounds like you made sure the madrigal knew too. Why though? Pure maliciousness, left on terms that bad? Liv sighed. My guess is that I made a stupid mistake, telling him it was all I wanted from our last job, which I had a hand in finding in the first place. He was probably suspicious afterward and did little digging of his own. He must have figured I was trying to cut them out of something big, or more importantly, cut him out. If he wants the stone, I don't understand why he'd tip off another interested party. Why confront me over it if he could leave that to someone I'm already striking sparks from? Just like him, honestly, to stand back and let someone else bleed. Maybe I'd panic and catch me moving it, saving him the search. Failing that, it's always a good idea to let your enemies soften each other up first. Wait until the dust settles and poke through the ashes. Could be he gets what he wants without a hair out of place. Alright, but that doesn't explain why the madrigal hasn't taken it. Viv chuckled ruefully. Well, I can't be positive it's the only reason, but it sounds like he just rubbed her the wrong way. That's it. I mean, he is an enormous dick. I don't get the impression he's going to give up that easily, is he? Definitely not, Viv frowned. In fact, he's probably much more dangerous now. She glanced at the door and couldn't help imagining Fenus with his ear pressed to the keyhole. I'll take care of it, though. There was a long silence while Tandri tapped her lower lip, her tail making lazy loops. At length, she said, setting that aside, what about the protection money? What about the Madrigal's little enforcer squad? Liv spread her hands. We came to an agreement, her idea. Well, an arrangement? No, there is going to be a payment of sorts. Weekly, in fact. Tandri's brow wrinkled in consternation. I guess she likes Thimble's cinnamon rolls. When Thimble arrived at his usual time, he was laboring under the burden of a wooden box, about 2 feet long and 1 foot wide. Viv took it off his hands, and he directed her with a paw to the pantry, where she set it down and removed the lid. Inside, packed in straw, was ice? She asked. The Ratkin gestured at the cold pit, where they kept the cream and several baskets of eggs. Colder, keeps longer. Where did you get it, though? Must be from the gnomish gasworks, said Tandri. Thimble nodded enthusiastically. I don't know what that is. It's a building on the river, steam and water powered. I'm not clear on the mechanics, but somehow they can produce ice. Viv glanced over at the coffee machine. Guess I'm not surprised. How much did it cost you, Thimble? He shrugged. Well, from now on we'll pay for it. You hear? He nodded agreeably and began transferring chunks of the now melting ice into the cold pit. She glanced across the room. Actually, this gives me an idea. Viv slid into the booth across from Hemington, who looked up distractedly from his research. She pushed the mug over to him. He blanched and then quickly mustered a smile. Why, thank you, but as I've said, I don't really like. Yes, I know, hot drinks. She nudged it closer. He pulled it the rest of the way, and his eyebrows shot up as he examined the contents. Cold. A few small chunks of ice bobbed in the coffee, and sweat purled on the mug. He took a tentative sip, licked his lips, and gave the drink a considering look. You know, that's not bad. Great, said Viv, lacing her fingers together, leaning forward on the table. I have a little favor to ask of you. His gaze immediately became suspicious. He made the slight drink back, but then had another quick sip. A favor? Naturally, it might help you. You already set up your ward here, right? I have, but I assure you it's... She waved the hand at him. I'm sure it's fine. Haven't noticed. What I want to know is, can you set another one? Another? Yes, for a person. A specific person. Hemington pursed his lips. Well, certainly. You understand I need some very precise information and materials to manage that, but yes, that is something I could do. You have someone in mind? I do. By the time they finished talking, Hemington had drained his mug and was crushing the ice between his teeth. Viv joined Baldree behind the machine. So I'm pretty sure we have a new drink to add to the menu. Well, we're going to need regular deliveries of ice, I think. Baldree smiled at her. Still room on the board? Then her smile fell away. Viv glanced at the door, and there stood Kellen, again wearing an expression that begged to meet a fist. He eased up to the counter and leaned on it in a familiar way that made Viv's skin itch. Hello, Baldree. Baldree didn't respond, and Viv waited, unsure whether the woman wanted her to intervene or not. Kellen didn't seem to notice, or didn't care about Baldree's icy glare, and continued, circling one finger on the countertop. It's so nice to be able to see whenever I want. I'd really like for us to see more of each other. I think that now... Please leave, said Baldree tightly. He looked annoyed at being interrupted. You know, there's no call to be rude. I'm just making a friendly gesture. If you're free this evening, then I could... She asked you to leave, said Viv. Now I'm telling you to. The kid glared at her with undisguised loathing. You can't tell me a shitting thing, he spat. Just try to lay a hand on me, and the madrigal... Oh, didn't you know? Viv interrupted him. The madrigal and I had a little meeting. She and I came to a bit of an understanding. Did nobody tell you? Kellen laughed, but he couldn't help sounding and looking a bit unsure, especially at her special emphasis on the word she. Right, continued Viv, and one thing I remember particularly well from our little chat was how much she hated assholes. You know, some people might consider any of our crew to be assholes just because of the nature of their business, but I don't think that way. She gestured at black blood on the wall. I've got respect for people who have to get their hands dirty to get things done. That's just work. No, it takes something special to be a real asshole. And I think she and I are of the same mind. She held his gaze, then crossed her arms. You aren't an asshole, are you, Kellen? I think she'd be pretty disappointed if that was the case. He opened and closed his mouth several times, trying to gather his dignity, and then turned and strode stiffly out of the shop. Viv didn't say anything to Tandri and went right back to her work. But out of the corner of her eye, she caught the barest curve of a smile on the woman's lips. At closing, they took down the menu again, and Tandri revised it, adding, "Any drink iced, a refined twist, add half a bit." As Viv watched Tandri chalk in some snowflakes with a flourish, she felt that old crawling sensation on her back, and couldn't help but glance over her shoulder. She half expected to find Fennis's humorless smile at the window. An old saying came to her unbidden. The poisoned cup foretells the poisoned blade. Chapter 20. As Viv returned from a lunchtime break, thumbing through a chapbook she'd bought, she paused near the table out front. She glanced at the one-sided chess game in progress, then at the little gnome studying it. "Is this seat taken?" she asked. "Not at all." He smiled at her and gestured toward the chair. Viv slid it out and sat, placing her book on the table. She offered her hand over the top of the board, mindful to not upset the pieces. "Viv," she said. "Durius," replied the old man, shaking her forefinger with his tiny, knobbly hand. He carefully sipped the drink before him. "I must say, I do enjoy your wonderful establishment. Real English coffee. Never thought I'd taste it again. In my day, you couldn't get it so easily, even in the bigger cities like Radius or Fathom. And to find it here, well, a rare pleasure." "That's good to hear," said Viv. "Glad it passes muster." "Oh, indeed. And these pastries," he waved at one of Thimble's confections, "an inspired pairing." "Can't take any credit for that, but I'll pass it on." Durius crunched into the thimblet and closed his eyes with appreciation. "So," said Viv, shifting in her seat, "you don't have to answer, but my friend in there is going crazy over your chess game." She pointed at Tandri, who was looking at her suspiciously from behind the counter. "Really?" "She swears you never move the other pieces. She's been trying to catch you doing it, and says she never has." "I definitely move them." "You do?" "Certainly, but I did it a long time ago," he said, as if that made any sense at all. "I'm sorry?" Said Durius without clarifying in any way whatsoever, "I used to be an adventurer like you. I'm also a retiree now. You found a peaceful place here, a special place. You planted something and now it's blossoming. Very nice. A good spot to rest." "My thanks to you for letting an old-timer shade under the branches of what you'd grown." Viv's mouth hung open. She hadn't a clue how to respond to that. A moment passed as Durius cried, "Ah, there you are." Amity stalked around the corner, delighted to allow the gnome to scratch behind her enormous ears. She stared balefully at Viv, then curled around at the base of the table. The gnome rested his feet on her back, where they were lost in tangles of sooty fur. "What a marvelous animal," he said with real admiration. "Certainly is," murmured Viv. Well, I didn't mean to interrupt your game. I'll let you get back to it." "Not at all," said Durius. "You go tend to what you're growing." "You go tend to what you're growing." When she returned to the counter with her book, Tandri eyed it approvingly, then whispered, "So, what's going on with the chess game? Did he say?" "He did say, but I'm not sure he answered," Viv replied. Around noon, Thimble scampered off after making a series of gestures that neither Viv nor Tandri could interpret. He obviously had some errand in mind, and Viv waved him on his way. He returned later with a small parcel bound in twine, and when there was a lull at the front, he placed it on the counter, delicately untying it. He folded away the paper to reveal several rough, dark slabs and chunks of something brown that gleamed with a soft waxiness. "What's that, Thimble?" asked Tandri. The baker broke off a sliver, popping it into his mouth and gesturing for them to do the same. Viv and Tandri each snapped off a small piece. Viv sniffed hers. The earthy smell was slightly sweet, almost coffee-like. She put the fragment on her tongue, and when she closed her lips, it melted, spreading throughout her mouth. She tasted dark bitterness, but with subtle flavors of vanilla, citrus, and in the far back, a hint of something that reminded her of wine. It was bold, both creamy and harsh, but alluring. Honestly, I doubted you could eat very much of it. That bitterness would overwhelm you. But the old spice seller was right. That kid was a genius, and she couldn't wait to see what he had planned. Tandri thoughtfully rolled the taste around in her mouth. "Okay, I'll ask again because I have to know. What is this?" He leaned forward, whiskers a quiver. "Chocolate." "You've got something in mind?" asked Viv. He nodded and produced another of his lists, shorter than before, but with a few requested pots and pans. Viv squatted to stare him in the eyes. "Thimble, anytime you have any big ideas, you can assure I'm on board, alright?" His velvety face wrinkled in a pleased expression that squeezed his eyes nearly shut. "I absolutely love Thimble, such a cute little rat." It didn't take long for Viv to gather Thimble's requested items. When she returned to the shop, she drew up short on the threshold, a sack over one arm. Kellen was back, standing stiffly before the counter. Viv's expression hardened, and she prepared to drop the sack, pick him up by the back of the neck, and haul him bodily into the street. Tandri caught her eye, though, and gave a small shake of her head. The succubus passed a folded wax paper sack across to the young man, who moved as though to snatch it, but mastered himself, reaching for it gently. "For the madrigal," said Tandri. Kellen nodded jerkily, like a marionette, and a strangled voice said, "Thank you, Miss." He turned with the sack in his hand, startling when he saw Viv. Recovering quickly, he rushed out the door. "Huh," said Viv, watching him go. "I'll be twice damned." Okay. As they prepared to lock up, Tandri went into the pantry and returned with a linen-covered handbasket that Viv hadn't noticed before. "What's that?" Excuse me. Tandri opened her mouth to speak, then fidgeted the basket to her other arm and finally said, "What do you have planned for the evening?" "Planned? Nothing. I'm usually bushed and turn in early. But to eat first, maybe." "Oh, good. I thought that, how things went, we should, celebrate, if you'd like." Yes. The trappings of romance. It's about time they actually did. This is a very nice slow burn, though, gotta say. Anyway, I'm getting off track here. Viv wasn't sure she'd ever seen Tandri properly nervous before. She had to admit, it was charming. Celebrate? I guess I hadn't thought about it. Sure, the madrigal is a bit worry now, but I don't think it'll take Venice long to figure out a different angle too. She saw Tandri's expression grow pained and caught herself suddenly feeling very stupid. Yes, the celebration sounds good. What did you have in mind? Nothing fancy, said Tandri. There's a little park above the river, west of Acres. Sometimes I go there in evenings. Used to, I mean. The view is nice and I packed some things. So, a sort of picnic? That sounds childish. She winced. Not like a celebration at all. It sounds wonderful, said Viv. Tandri recovered some of the pieces of a smile. It was a nice view. The spot wasn't so much a park as a groomed area featuring a statue of some long-robed Acres alumnus whose countenance was undoubtedly more imposing in stone than it ever was in life. Cherry trees and hedges ringed him, and he presided over a little rise above the river. The vantage provided a lovely sunset panorama of the university's copper steeples, like twirls of smoke little twirls of smoke dotted the rooftops like freshly extinguished candles. They sat on the grass, and Tandri unpacked some bread and cheese, a small crock of preserves, some hard sausage, and a bottle of brandy. I forgot glasses. I don't mind if you don't, replied Viv. It's really not much. Viv opened the brandy, took a swig, passed the bottle to Tandri. Feels like a celebration to me. Tandri took a solid glug as well, while Viv sliced the sausage and slathered some preserves on the bread. They ate and drank and talked about nothing much as some birds came to roost in the cherry trees. The sun drew down, and the chill of the river crept up in a slow, shivering wave. They shared an easy silence in the waning light, and then Viv asked, "Why'd you leave the university?" Tandri looked at her. "Not why did you go in the first place?" Viv shrugged. I wasn't surprised by that at all. The other woman looked back out over the university steeples and thought for a while. Viv guessed she wouldn't answer and regretted asking. "I wasn't born here. I fled here." Viv almost said something, but waited. Nobody was chasing me, if that's what you're wondering. I was fleeing the trap of what I am. This. Tandri touched the tip of one of her horns and her tail lashed. I thought a university was a place where ideas are challenged, where what you do matters, not where you came from or what you came from. A place where logic and math and science would prove that I'm more than what I was born to. But it seems like I take that with me wherever I go. You attended, though. Tandri nodded grimly. I did. I scrimped together the tuition and I was granted admission. Nobody stopped me. They took my money, absolutely. There are no bylaws keeping someone like me out. But it didn't matter. Not really. What's the saying? They followed the letter of the law, but not the spirit. She sighed. The spirit was unenlightened. Viv thought about Kellen and nodded, so I fled. Again. They allowed the silence to resume, and Viv passed Tandri the brandy. She drank more deeply, and when she wiped her mouth, she looked over at Viv. No pearls of wisdom? Nope. Tandri's eyebrows rose. But I will say, Viv glanced over and regarded Tandri solemnly. Fuck those motherfuckers. Well, that's one way to end it. Tandri's surprised laugh startled the birds from the cherry trees. Viv carried the basket while walking Tandri home again. This time all the way to her room. Oh, I see. Neither was unsteady. They hadn't finished the brandy, but they were both pleasantly warm and liquid. That's one way to describe it. Tandri opened the door at the top of the stairs, and after a moment's hesitation, ushered Viv inside. Forward. Viv stooped to keep her head from banging on the low ceiling. The tiny single-room apartment featured a tidy cot, some shelves bursting with books, a tasseled carpet, and a small vanity. Stayed here when I went to Acres, said Tandri, waving a hand at the room. She took the basket from Viv and set it on the vanity. I just never bothered to move. She looked up at Viv, who could feel the warm glow that sometimes peeked out when Tandri was at her least cautious. But she didn't think it was responsible for the prickling warmth that burned deeper inside herself. The brandy, surely, was the culprit. Viv began Tandri, but her gaze dropped and she lost what she was going to say. Viv didn't let her find it again. Good night, Tandri. She was very conscious of the size and roughness of her hand as she reached out and squeezed Tandri's shoulder. And thank you. I hope I never make you flee. And then before her friend could say anything else, Viv left, quietly, closing the door behind her. Okay, chat. We're on chapter 21 now, and I think... Let's see how many pages this is. I think this will be a good enough spot to end it on, considering we started at chapter 14 earlier, and we typically do it in like batches of 7. So yeah, I think we can call it a day there, chat. So, for those who stayed for this very nice, soft-hearted reading, I hope you did enjoy the story as much as I did. I am glad to see that they really have some, let's call it, pretty nice messages to this story. You know, about things like overcoming upbringings and previous backgrounds. You know, like with Viv and her old adventuring ways, how she was able to resolve the whole, let's call it, concern with the Madrigal as well. I do think it's a very cute way to resolve it. And I love how Thimble is the unspoken MVP of this story. His pastries do indeed create miracles. But yeah, I do hope you all enjoyed your stay here at the Chipped Cup Cafe tonight, where you end up when you don't really know where you're headed. Once again, my name is Moka Kahvesi, your resident tsukumogami barista here. And I do hope you enjoyed this story as much as I did. I don't think we'll be raiding anyone for now. It is right around midnight as well. Thanks to any people who decided to lurk, and thanks to my mods, especially to Hay. She did have quite a long shift before modding for me tonight, so I do appreciate that a lot, Hay. But yeah, we do hope to see you again whenever we pick this up. We'll most likely do so next Tuesday as well. But for now, have a good rest of your day, morning, afternoon, or evening. And we hope to see you again here at the Chip Cup Cafe. Goodbye now.